Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Behind the Headlines, the weekly show where we tackle all of the week's biggest news stories. I'm joined this week by Moeem and Clive Menzies, who is from Critical Thinking, and it's a pleasure to have you both back on the show. It's been too long. Gentlemen, we're going to kick off with our first topic as we have a lot to get through this evening, and it brings us straight to UK politics. Our Prime Minister, in fact, David Cameron, has been hit by the news and the leaking of the Panama Papers, which reveals that he and his family have previously held shares. We actually have a video which will bring you all up to speed better than I can.
It's been a long week for the Prime Minister. He's trying to save the steel industry, he's battling Brexit, and he's faced a flood of questions about his family wealth.
I should deal with the past as well.
Questions that today he tried to put to rest. Questions like, has he benefited from the offshore fund set up by his father Ian, Blairmore Holdings? Today, talking to ITV News, he finally admitted he did.
Samantha and I had a joint account and we owned 5,000 units in Blairmore Investment Trust, which we sold in January 2010. That was worth something like £30,000.
Is there a profit on it?
I paid income tax on the dividends, but there was a profit on it, but it was less than the capital gains tax allowance, so I didn't pay capital gains tax, but it was subject to all the UK taxes in all the normal ways.
But that may not be the extent of the Prime Minister's benefit. Last night, Channel 4 News revealed that Ian Cameron owned 6,000 shares in a second offshore fund based in Jersey, the Close International Equity Growth Fund. When he died in 2010, these assets were passed on to his family. Today, his son David Cameron admitted there is no way of knowing whether he inherited part of that offshore legacy.
He left me some money, very generously, quite a lot of money, and I've been able to
tell us how much?
That. I think it was published at the time. It was £300,000. It was published at the time, as these things are. I obviously can't, point to every source of every bit of the money, and Dad's not around for me to ask the questions now.
But the Prime Minister is adamant that despite being set up in a tax haven, the scheme set up by his father was not designed to avoid tax.
I think a lot of the criticisms are based on a fundamental misconception, which is that Blairmore Investment, a unit trust, was set up with the idea of avoiding tax. It wasn't. It was set up after exchange controls went, so that people who wanted to invest in dollar-denominated shares and companies could do so.
According to the Prime Minister, everyone who invested in Blairmore Holdings would have at some point paid full and fair UK taxes. Experts aren't so sure.
David Cameron, with respect, doesn't know what tax was paid by those who invested in the Blairmore Fund. He can say that if people who held those bearer shares declared all of the income and gains that they were obliged to on their UK tax returns, they would have paid UK tax. But the problem with that argument is that he does not know, and what we do know about bearer shares is that they are an invitation to avoid tax.
And this expert questions whether Blairmore Holdings was really any better than the very funds the Prime Minister has criticised in the past.
Established as it was in Panama with bearer shares, this fund is an invitation to those who choose to accept it to evade tax. What David Cameron has talked about as being morally repugnant is tax avoidance.
Today was one of difficult questions for the Prime Minister, but one still remains. In light of this week's revelations, does this leader still have the credibility to make tax transparency his legacy?
And there you have it. It seems as if more ideas of dodgy money being abroad and corruption in our government has come to the limelight in our news again. Clive, let me come straight to you on this. Now, dodgy money, dodgy accounts and not paying taxes is not the first time we've seen this government being accused of these kind of deals, but particular individuals are now coming up and saying that David Cameron, in particular, needs to step down and resign as a result of this. Edward Snowden, the opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, among other MPs, are just a few examples. What do you make of this? Is this really a situation as bad as it's made out, or do you think it's been exacerbated by the news?
Well, I think there are many layers to this particular story, and it's quite difficult to pick them all out, but I'll try and pick a few of the essential elements as I see it. I mean, there's been common practice over many years for people to hold assets in offshore funds. It doesn't necessarily, as Cameron suggests, means wrongdoing, because as long as they declared those holdings and repatriated the dividends for tax purposes, then it was all legal and above board. There is an issue with bearer shares, and if somebody chooses to avoid tax, evade tax rather than avoid tax, in other words, do something illegal, then clearly that is a problem, and Cameron has no way of knowing whether people have or haven't. But the bigger question is, what has led to this witch hunt? Because you mentioned Edward Snowden. Now, if you actually examine the way these leaks came out, they were choreographed, they were well orchestrated. Unlike a normal leak where all the information gets dumped into a server somewhere and people can pick over it, this has been leaked out judiciously. And the first I saw of it was that the Prime Minister of Iceland was implicated. Now, Iceland is the only country that jailed 28 senior bankers. Now, if you want to talk about offshore and obscuring one's wealth and power, then one of the main practitioners of that has been the Rothschild family, which has been hiding behind agents, companies, shells, foundations for centuries. They've made an art form of it. So much so that in the midst of this story, what was probably not reported in the mainstream media is that Rothschilds are opening an office in Reno, Nevada. So what is actually happening is that these offshore centres are being targeted as being the problem. But in actual fact, the City of London is offshore to everyone outside the UK. Nevada is offshore to most of the world except the people who live in the United States. And so nothing is going to change in all this. What is happening is that the tree is being shaken and the finger is being pointed primarily at the opponents of those people who object to this idea of a hegemonic banking system and a one world government, which is the thrust of where we're going. And so to pick on the Prime Minister of Iceland, Putin, who doesn't have any offshore accounts, but he was supposedly associated with people that do. Assad similarly doesn't have offshore accounts. So what the media has been focusing on primarily until we got to Cameron was all the people who are standing in the way of this drive towards a one world government. As far as Cameron is concerned, I think there's another layer to all this, is that if you want a one world government, what's the way to get there? You have a one world tax system. So if they have universal declaration of everybody's holding into a gigantic single database for tax purposes, then you've got a global tax system. The next step is a global government. So Cameron's local problem is something of a storm in a teacup, but it could just be that it's destabilising the whole political melee in order to get everybody to say, well, what we really need is an international agreement that everybody has to declare what they're doing. So we end up, so rather than Big Brother being nation by nation, you have a global Big Brother where everybody is under the same control. And this goes along with cashless society, so that everybody is dependent on plastic. And if you dissent or if you upset somebody, then you can be cut off at the push of a mouse button or a click.
Very interesting. Moeim, let me bring you in on this now. Do you think that this is a particular incident where David Cameron should be forced to resign? It seems to be the narrative that is whipped up amongst the opposition and amongst other activists. What's your opinion on what's going on?
Well, you've put me on the spot, haven't you? Let's go for his head. Well, he is a great-great-great-great-grandson of King William, apparently, according to a researcher. Leaving that aside, I think the key issue other than tax, money laundering, and the role of London. We are in London after all, and he is the head of the government is in London. I mean, we're also an Islamic show. Islamic governance, certainly one of the principles is accountability, muhasabah, hisbah, muhasabah, and so on. So, I mean, I cannot honestly, and I don't want to comment on the minutiae, if I dare I say. I think most of us don't really know what on earth has been going on. This is only the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure more revelations will come out. I think it's the tip of the iceberg, actually, to be quite frank. But the bottom line is we should have accountability of whoever. And whether he should resign, well, in a situation like this, we need the facts. And also, is he going to be tried by the media? Or, you know, when you get revelations by a head of state or government, how do you make them accountable? Because this has only come out through the media.
Do you think that there is a genuine iceberg, so to speak?
Yes,
Or do you think that
of course.
So you think that this is David Cameron hiding away all this kind of dodgy deals, or you think this was simply because he has mentioned a couple of times now he has answered questions regarding the issue. He said that obviously it was his father who was dealing with it. He did pay the tax when the money was passed down. He has sold shares from the Panama situation and so on. So it seems as if perhaps the media is being too harsh on David Cameron.
Well, he's a good salesman, isn't he? It's called, those who know about sales, there's a thing called objection handling when you're caught red-handed. So he's good at that, isn't he? No, the bottom line is, look, when the crash happened, some of us have been active before the crash, during and after, is that I remember a chap called Shaxson, S-H-A-X-S-O-N. He had a book on the Treasure Islands, you know, the offshore islands. And he spoke, you know, at St. Paul's, Tent City, and I raised a question, and he didn't answer it. Now, the thing is, London is, for those who understand global finance, is the financial capital of the world. And money is laundered here, is documented, with guys in blue suits, you know, and they're very good at it. And tax, money laundering, rigging, there's no free market. There's no clean money, and there's no clean politicians. So where do you start the head chopping? I put the question to you and the audience.
Well, I wouldn't claim to know the answer to that question. So let me go straight back to you, Clive, and deflect this question away from me. Help me to understand a bit better. Why do we have this situation of tax havens and so on? I mean, is it just a situation of corruption, or is there, like you said earlier, I mean, there's clearly some kind of a system in place. Is it a bad system where, you know, it's just bad luck? Some people have the ability to avoid tax and so do so, or is it just a completely corrupt system? Maybe you could elaborate more to help me understand here.
Well, first and foremost, I should say that the main organisation behind these leaks, the International Community for Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, that is backed by foundations. In other words, we don't know well, we know there's the Rockefellers involved, we know the Ford Foundation, Soros' foundations are involved. So there are many instances, both onshore and offshore, where people are hiding their identity behind foundations, or they're exerting their will via foundations or offshore structures or whatever it may be. I think the original rationale for offshore centres was where you wanted to conduct an activity that you didn't want on your home turf, but you wanted to enjoy the benefit of it. So you have gambling in Monaco, you have gambling in Macau, for example. So these became sort of little offshore centres. And the City of London is effectively a state within a state. It's an offshore centre within Britain. So these things have grown out of practice. But the real issue, I mean, if one's mainly concerned about tax, and there are many other reasons why these structures exist to obscure who's got influence and who's got power, but if we're just talking about tax, there's a very simple answer to this. And when income tax was instigated, it was called a tax on the honest man, and that's what it is, because people who play by the book pay tax, and people who don't avoid it, and even those who've written the rules say they can avoid it. So basically, it's the ordinary common man who pays most of the tax. And the richer you are, the more you can avoid. If we actually taxed what is common to all of us, land, for example, you can't hide land in the Bahamas. You can't hide the land that exists in the UK and the Bahamas. So if we actually tax land and all the things that should belong to all of us, then we wouldn't have this problem. There might be other reasons why we might be concerned about offshore structures, but tax wouldn't be one of them. And in this globalized economy, the idea that you try and keep hold of, if you've got a multinational trading in your country, with all these various tax arrangements, how do you actually keep hold of sufficient of what they create in order to run your public services and all the rest of it? The truth is you can't, and that's what we're seeing. They're saying the answer is, let's have a global tax system and share it out equally, and you can reckon that ain't going to work. But the alternative is for each national sovereign nation to actually tax the land. And if they tax the land, then there would be plenty of money to pay for public services and for everyone to get a citizen's dividend, and you wouldn't have a problem of tax avoidance. So this problem, as far as tax is concerned, would go away. So I think this is a very useful story, but the use of it is not whether Cameron should resign or who's hidden the most wealth, because if we really want to point fingers, we know who's hidden the most wealth. The Rothschilds have hidden trillions in various structures, both offshore and onshore. So if we want to solve the problem, let's get to the structure of the problem, which is our basis of taxation in the first place.
Moim, do you think that the situation we have now, loopholes that big organisations, big wigs use in order to, cheat the system and cheat taxes and so on, do you think that this is an inevitable scenario which we can't really do anything about? It's always going to happen to some degree or another. Maybe that's just the world we live in. Maybe that's just the system that will inevitably take place. I mean, what's your take? And perhaps you could come back to what Clive said as well. Perhaps you have an alternative.
I mean, we've got a pyramidical system. The 1%. Indeed, the more one analyse it, it's probably 0.01%, as he said. I agree with him, by the way. All this, pointing at demons and the bad guys. There's a lot of bad guys and girls, ladies, dare I say. And the biggest one is basically not mentioned in the media. But I'd go a step further than what Clive said if we really want to point fingers. I agree with them. Those who've studied money, global finance, money, banking, central private cartels, Rothschilds is a name, a dynasty that will come again and again. There are others, but these guys, dwarf others. However, we need to go a step further if we're going to go to the root of the problem. It has also been analysed by some researchers. Is Rothschild just operating in a vacuum? Did he just come out the blue? Voila. Or is he an agent of someone else? Now, apparently, you don't have to agree with this. Our research, or research that's come to us, has identified the Vatican, that he is an agent of the Vatican. Now, as I said, when you're identifying any problem, we need to diagnose it. So anyway, the bottom line is, if you've got a system that is pyramidical, obviously there is one law for them, whoever they are, and one law for the others. Obviously, it's unjust, it's unequal from an Islamic perspective. Do we have to keep it in place? Is it immovable? Of course it's not. The first step is for people to understand that the system currently is designed. It's not an accident. That's the first point. Those who say, we've got to accept it, or the rich people have always been like this. Maybe they have been, yeah. They have designed structures like the Pharaoh. But the Pharaoh had to face a chap called Moses. Now that is history. That is human history. That when we are faced with, let's not call it evil, but inequalities or whatever, injustice, we do not just accept it as a fait accompli. We need to firstly understand, as Clive said, the dynamic. It's like a car, an engine. You know, how does it work? You know, we've got to explain to people how the financial engine system operates and how it can be restructured. So it's not there by an accident, it is there by design. And there are people at the top of it. And we need to understand exactly how this system functions and is controlled. There is a driver in the seat. There is control mechanism. And I believe the media, and that's why programs like this are very important, we got to go, you know, go to the alternative media. I suppose this is alternative media, it's not the BBC. The alternative media has a critical role to inform, educate the public on the truth of the system.
Very good point. So we may actually have a caller which we can bring in, see if we can get a third viewpoint. Assalamu alaikum.
Great show as always. I just wanted to highlight that, you know, we often hear that, or like it's been said on the show, that, you know, these structures have been designed and there are narratives out there and they've been pushed and the media has its own role to play. While I agree, obviously, there are facts and figures to back all of that up. What I really wanted to ask is, why is it then that you've got a Prime Minister who is finding himself in the middle of all of this? Because, you know, surely if he was governing and he was one of the people instrumental or one of the cogs in this wheel, why is it now that you're finding that there are the calls for him to step down have become louder and louder, and you've got real calls for him to step down, and you've got sorry, the line's a little bit bad. You've got mass demonstrations that are being planned to be taking place tomorrow outside Downing Street. Now, I don't know how effective these things will be, but in terms of if these things were coordinated, these leaks, then was there not coordination? You feel that the Prime Minister would also be in this position where people are so outraged at how he has dealt with this? I mean, if he came out and he just agreed right at the beginning and said, you know, I admit that my family had something to do with this, as opposed to saying, or in some ways denying it, and then saying it's a private matter to the point that he actually did have to admit it, I think people are genuinely, you know, quite angered at the Prime Minister.
I think we've got the gist of the question. Thank you very much. Perhaps I might let you perhaps try and answer that, Moim. It seems, why is it now, if we do have this system, this corrupt establishment, and these names and so on hidden behind, and the system against the people, why is it that we're now starting to see individuals like David Cameron, for example, the Prime Minister of an entire nation, finally being exposed and put in the jury box, so to speak?
Well, the whole timing of this leak, you know, raises many questions, obviously. The timing, the consequences. When things like this happen, obviously, whoever has made the leak, wants maximum damage, obviously. Otherwise, they wouldn't want it out. And in the process, because big names are involved, and that was the purpose, various people are going to be caught off guard. Now, I would actually divert the discussion to Iceland, which I know a bit about. I've even been there. Is you know, one impact of this crisis, talking about resignations or heads being chopped off, is Iceland, which actually rejected the bankers' agenda when their country basically went, or their banking system went bankrupt. The people said, we're not basically going to be accountable. The bankers, who were speculating, gambling with the money and the nation's wealth, were accused of being guilty and to be ousted. And interestingly, that the first Prime Minister, talking about Prime Ministers, that has been damaged fatally is Iceland. So that raises questions, you know, exactly what's going on. And I think it's up to everyone to make their own judgment about what is happening or not happening. It's very complex. The bottom line, it's very complex. For instance, that Prime Minister, was it to teach that nation a lesson? You know, some sort of lesson. So this is an unfolding story. And I think I would agree with Clive, without going into all the details. I think anyone to pretend they know it all, you know, on these type of issues, I think would be misleading. I think there is certainly an agenda that's brewing, and that is, if there is a global tax problem, there should be a global tax solution. So some power somewhere is trying to colour the agenda globally. So I'm just raising, questions or developments that people may have not thought, because some of us believe that there is a 0.1% at the top who control the media, or great sections of the media, and wealth and power, and things don't just happen out the blue.
And that must surely be one of the reasons why we're not seeing names like the Rothschilds.
Well, yeah, why is Rothschilds not mentioned?
Yeah.
Why doesn't someone give me £6 million for saying that? Now, you know, if we're going to talk about culprits or the big guys, not one person, you check all the mainstream media, has mentioned Rothschild.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
You should give me £6 million for saying that.
We are actually
I'll probably get a phone call from Mr. Rothschild.
Yeah, hopefully not anyway. But we are actually approaching a break, so we'll just end it there for now. But stay tuned. We will be back. We've got lots more to discuss, so don't go anywhere.